What it's like to be a guardsman, fighting on a demon world in Warhammer 40k. The transport shudders as it breaks through the upper atmosphere, and you feel it in your bones before you see it. Something is wrong. Not wrong in the way that turbulence is wrong, or the way that anti-aircraft fire makes everything shake and rattle. This is different. Deeper. The kind of wrong that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur at the edges, like reality itself is rejecting your presence here. You are a guardsman in the Astra Militarum, one of countless billions who serve the God Emperor across the galaxy. You have trained for combat against orcs, against heretics, even against the horrifying bioforms of tyrannid swarms. But nothing in your training prepared you for this. Nothing could have. Because the world below is not simply an enemy stronghold or a contested war zone. It is something far worse. It is a demon world, a place where the Imperium and the Imperium have become so thoroughly intertwined that the laws of physics themselves are merely suggestions, where reality bends to the will of creatures that should not exist. Your regiment received its orders 3 weeks ago. 30,000 souls, drawn from a dozen different worlds, consolidated into a fighting force, and told you would be deploying to reclaim an imperial world from heretical forces. That was the official line. The commissars spoke of duty and honor. The officers showed tactical maps that meant nothing, because how do you map a world where geography shifts like water? The ecclesiarchy preachers led prayers and spoke of the emperor's protection, but you saw it in their eyes, that flicker of fear, that knowledge that many of you would not be coming back, and those who did might not be recognizable as human anymore. The journey through the warp should have taken days. It took weeks, or maybe it took hours. Time moves strangely when you travel through a realm where time has no meaning, and stranger still when you're heading toward a world that exists partially within that realm. You remember moments from the journey, the way the Geller field would flicker just for a second, and you would hear things on the other side of the hull, scratching, whispering, sometimes laughing. The way some of your fellow guardsmen would wake screaming, or not wake at all. The way the ship's chronometers would show different times in different sections, until the tech priests finally gave up trying to maintain any consistent record. And then came the briefing, the real briefing, not the sanitized version they gave you before departure, but the truth that the commanding officers could no longer hide. You were not going to a world held by traitors. You were going to a demon world, a planet that had been lost to the warp so completely that it existed in both dimensions simultaneously, a place where the impossible was commonplace and sanity was the first casualty. The planet's name was Vordrith, though whether that was its original designation or something it had become, no one could say. It had been an agricultural world once, providing food to 3 nearby hive worlds. Then the warp storms came. The Eye of Terror had belched forth one of its periodic expansions, and Vordrith had been swallowed whole. For 50 years it had been gone, presumed lost forever. Then it returned, not as it was, but transformed, twisted. And the things that lived there now were broadcasting signals, messages that spoke of conquest, of spreading their corruption to other worlds in the sector. The Imperium could not allow it to stand. A full-scale invasion was deemed necessary. Space Marines would make planetfall in key locations, striking at the hearts of enemy strongholds with the precision and fury that only the Adeptus Astartes could bring. But they needed support. They needed bodies. They needed the Imperial Guard. They needed you. As your transport drops lower, you catch your first glimpse of the surface through the viewport. Your mind struggles to process what you see. The sky is the wrong color, not the blue or gray or orange of a normal atmosphere, but something that shifts between purple and green and colors you have no names for. The landscape below looks like someone took a photograph of a world and then crumpled it, folded it, twisted it into shapes that hurt to look at. Mountains float in the air, suspended by nothing. Rivers flow upward, defying gravity. Forests grow in spirals, their trunks twisted together into patterns that suggest intelligence, purpose, malevolence. The soldier next to you vomits into his helmet. The sergeant begins reciting the litany of protection, his voice shaking. The commissar stands at the front of the bay, bolt pistol in one hand, the primer in the other, reading aloud about duty and sacrifice. But even he seems smaller somehow, diminished by the knowledge of what awaits below. The transport shudders again, harder this time. You feel the landing gear deploy. The rear ramp begins to lower, and light floods in. Wrong light. It moves like liquid, casting shadows that point in directions that make no geometric sense. The air that rushes in carries smells that trigger revulsion deep in your primal brain. Burning copper, rotting flowers, something sweet and chemical that makes your eyes water. "Stand ready!" the sergeant roars, and you grip your laser gun with hands that want to shake, but you force them steady. You are a guardsman. You have faced orcs that stood twice your height. You have held the line against traitor forces that outnumbered you 10 to 1. You can do this. You have to do this. Because if you don't, if the guard breaks here, then who will stand between this nightmare and the innocent worlds beyond? The ramp hits the ground with a metallic clang that echoes wrong, the sound repeating and overlapping itself in ways that suggest the air here doesn't carry sound the same way it should. You see the landscape properly now, and your mind tries to deny it. The ground beneath your feet is soil, but it moves, not like sand or loose earth, but deliberately, purposefully, as if the planet itself is aware of your presence. The vegetation is all wrong. Plants with leaves of metal, flowers with petals that look like human skin, trees that breathe, their trunks expanding and contracting in rhythm with something that might be lungs. "Move out! Move out!" The orders come rapid fire. You fall into formation automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought fails. Around you, hundreds of other transports are disgorging their cargo of humanity. Thousands of guardsmen, arranging themselves into defensive positions, setting up heavy weapon emplacements, unloading chimera transports and Lehman Russ battle tanks. The machinery of imperial warfare deploying with practiced efficiency, even here where efficiency and practice feel like fragile shields against an overwhelming tide. The bombardment begins almost immediately, but it doesn't come from artillery or orbital strikes. The sky simply tears open in places, and things fall through. Not shells or missiles, but creatures. Demons. Lesser ones at first, pink-skinned horrors that giggle as they materialize, their laughter a sound that bypasses your ears and goes straight to your brain, triggering terror responses that feel primal and absolute. The shooting starts. Laser guns spit their familiar red beams, and you feel a moment of comfort in that familiarity. The light is the right color, at least. The sound is right. The recoil against your shoulder is right. But then you see where your shots are landing. You watch lass bolts strike demon flesh and the creatures stagger, shriek, but they don't die. Not the way things should die. They dissolve, coming apart like smoke. But the smoke reshapes itself yards away, the demon reforming with that hideous giggling laugh, as if death itself is a joke it doesn't understand. This is your introduction to fighting on a demon world. This is the moment when you realize that everything you thought you understood about warfare, about combat, about the very nature of reality itself, is about to be tested in ways that will break minds far stronger than yours. This is the moment when you understand, with a clarity that is almost blinding, that you are not fighting an army. You are fighting existence itself, and the war has only just begun. The breaking of reality. The first week on Vordrith teaches you that physics is not a universal constant. It's more like a suggestion that reality sometimes chooses to ignore, especially here where the warp has sunk its claws so deep into the fabric of the Imperium that the two have become inseparable. You learn this lesson slowly, through a series of small horrors that accumulate until they become one overwhelming truth. The universe does not work the way it should on a demon world. Time is the first thing you notice going wrong. Your chronometer says it has been 6 hours since you made planetfall. Your body insists it has been 3 days. Your memories feel compressed, as if weeks of experience have been crammed into those 6 hours. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe only minutes have passed and your mind is stretching them out, trying to make sense of experiences too dense and terrible to process at normal speed. You mention this to Corporal Venn, and he laughs. It's not a pleasant laugh. Forget about time, he says, and you can see he's been here longer than you, maybe by days or weeks or years for all you know. His uniform is worn in ways that suggest long use, but it was new when the regiment deployed. It doesn't exist here the same way. I've watched the sun rise 3 times without setting. I've seen shadows move backward. Yesterday, if yesterday even means anything, I saw a man take a wound to his chest and then watch time reverse for just him, the blood flowing back into his body, the wound healing itself and then opening again, over and over, until he was screaming for someone to shoot him and end it. You want to think he's exaggerating. You want to believe that combat stress has made him irrational, but then you see it yourself. A squad from another company, moving in formation across open ground toward an enemy position. You watch them advance, step by step, and then suddenly, they're back where they started. Not retreating, not falling back, just there again, as if the last minute never happened. And they're confused, shouting into their vox, trying to understand why their position has changed. You watch them advance again, the same pattern, the same steps. And this time, when they reach the halfway point, something reaches out from the ground beneath them and pulls them down into soil that swallows them like water, and you never see them again. Gravity is another casualty of the warp's influence. Most of the time, it works normally. Down is down, up is up, and a dropped weapon falls to the ground. But then there are places where it doesn't. You find them by accident usually, or by watching someone else discover them. There's a section of the battlefield near what the maps call Hill 37, where gravity points sideways. You can see men walking on vertical surfaces as if they were horizontal, their feet somehow finding purchase on cliff faces. Or there's the ravine where gravity reverses entirely, and anything that falls into it falls up, disappearing into the sky until it's lost from view. The commissariat has declared these zones forbidden, ordering all troops to avoid them, but in the chaos of combat, soldiers still stumble into them. You watch a chimera transport accelerate through one of these zones and suddenly lift off the ground, not like it's jumping, but like it's falling upward, the crew screaming over the vox, until the signal cuts out and you never hear from them again. The landscape itself is alive in ways that normal worlds are not. Not alive like a jungle teem's, with life, but alive with intention and malice. The ground shifts beneath your feet, not from seismic activity, but from choice. You're digging in for a defensive position one moment, and the next, the earth is reforming itself, pushing your carefully constructed trenches closed, forcing you to dig again or abandon the position entirely. Rocks sprout from the ground like teeth, sharp and sudden, impaling soldiers who were standing on safe ground seconds before. The vegetation moves when you're not looking directly at it, creeping closer, rearranging itself, until you turn around and realize that the forest line that was 50 yards away is now 15 yards closer, the trees arranged in patterns that suggest encirclement. Water doesn't behave right either. You find this out when your unit tries to cross a stream. It looks normal enough. Clear water, maybe knee-deep, flowing in a direction that at least pretends to make sense. But when Private Torrin steps into it, he starts screaming. The water is alive. It's reaching for him, wrapping around his legs like hands, pulling him down. You and 3 others grab him, try to haul him back to shore, but the water is strong and getting stronger, and you can see things moving beneath the surface. Not fish, not anything natural. Shapes that suggest human faces, mouths open wide, hungry. You pull harder, and finally Torrin comes free, but his legs are marked where the water touched him. Burns that look like acid damage, but deeper, like something tried to dissolve him from the outside in. He dies 2 days later, the wounds refusing to heal, instead spreading slowly up his body no matter what the medics try. The sky is no safer than the ground. Clouds move with purpose, forming shapes that are too deliberate to be random. You see faces in them sometimes. Vast, inhuman faces that watch the battlefield below with eyes made of storm systems. Lightning doesn't strike randomly. It chooses targets. You see it hit the same spot 3 times in quick succession, each bolt more powerful than the last, until the ground is glassed and anything that was there has been vaporized. The rain, when it comes, is wrong. Sometimes it's blood. Sometimes it's acid that eats through gear and armor. Sometimes it's something worse, a liquid that makes men who are touched by it start laughing and can't stop, laughing until they die from exhaustion or until their squad mates are forced to silence them because the laughter draws things from the dark places. Sound behaves strangely. Words echo when they shouldn't, repeating themselves seconds or minutes after they were spoken, sometimes from directions that make no sense. You call out a warning about enemy contact on your left, and your voice comes back to you from your right, but distorted, stretched. The words the same, but the tone changed to mockery. Music plays sometimes with no apparent source. Not imperial hymns or march songs, but something else. Melodies that hurt to hear, that make your head feel full of pressure, that cause nosebleeds and sudden fits of rage or despair. The tech priests insist there must be enemy speakers broadcasting these sounds, but every attempt to locate the source finds nothing. The stars are wrong. At night, if there is night, if the concept even applies on a world where time is fluid, you look up and see constellations that should not exist. The astronomers among the officer corps, those trained in stellar navigation, refuse to discuss what they see. One of them goes mad, tearing his own eyes out, rather than continue to witness the impossible arrangements of light in the darkness above. The stars move sometimes, swirling and reforming into patterns that suggest symbols, glyphs of power from the dark ages of human history, marks that should have been forgotten, but persist in this place where forgetting seems impossible. You learn not to trust your senses. That's the hardest lesson. Sight lies. You see your squad mate standing 10 feet away, and you call to him, but he doesn't respond. And when you approach, you realize it's not him at all, but a statue that looks exactly like him, carved from stone that's warm to the touch and weeps blood from stone eyes. Hearing lies. You hear the voice of your commanding officer over the vox, issuing orders to advance, and you move forward only to find out later that the officer was 50 miles away and never gave that command. Touch lies. You reach out to steady yourself against a wall, and the wall is soft, yielding, made of something that feels like human skin and recoils from your touch as if you've hurt it. The enemy uses this against you. Of course they do. Demons are creatures of the warp, beings that exist outside normal causality, and they understand this twisted reality far better than you ever could. They appear where they should not be able to appear, materializing out of angles in space that should not exist. They move through dimensions that human perception was never designed to process, seeming to teleport or phase through solid matter or exist in multiple places simultaneously. They speak words that bypass language, that communicate concepts directly into your brain, thoughts that feel alien and corrosive, that make you question reality itself. And the traitors, the cultists and fallen guardsmen who serve chaos, they've learnt to navigate this nightmare landscape. They know which zones are safe and which are death traps. They know when gravity will shift and how to exploit it. They know where the ground will open and swallow the unwary. They move with confidence through terrain that reduces your unit to confusion and hesitation. And that confidence is itself a weapon, because it shows you how thoroughly you are outmatched, how fundamentally unprepared you are for warfare in this place. Some men break under the strain. You see it happen. A strong soldier, Someone who has fought through campaigns that would have broken lesser men suddenly stops, moving, just stops. His eyes go distant, and he begins to speak in a monotone about how nothing is real, how everything is just vibrations in the warp, how there's no point in fighting, because fighting implies choice, and choice implies free will, and free will cannot exist in a universe where cause and effect have become untethered from each other. The commissar puts a bolt round through his head before he can finish the thought, and no one protests because everyone understands. The breakdown is contagious. If one man starts questioning reality, others will follow, and then you don't have a fighting force anymore, just a mob of philosophers debating existence while demons tear them apart. You adapt because you must. You stop trying to understand and focus instead on simple, concrete goals. Move from this position to that position. Fire your weapon at the enemy. Follow orders. Don't think about how the sky is breathing, or how the ground whispers your name, or how you're pretty sure you died yesterday, but you're still here somehow. Just keep moving, keep fighting, because the alternative is to acknowledge the full scope of the horror you're living through, and that acknowledgement would be the end of you. Reality is broken on Vordrith. You accept this the way you accept that last bolts are red and explosions are loud. It's simply a condition of your existence here. The universe is not what you thought it was. Physics is a sometimes thing. Time is meaningless. Space folds in on itself like origami crafted by a mad god. And you are expected to wage war in this environment, to hold the line, to push forward, to achieve objectives that might not even exist by the time you reach them. The breaking of reality is not the worst part of fighting on a demon world, but it is the foundation upon which all other horrors are built. It is the context in which every other nightmare becomes possible. Because once you understand that reality itself is negotiable, that the fundamental laws that govern existence can be rewritten at the whim of dark powers that hate you, then you also understand that there is no safety, no certainty, nothing you can rely on except the lace gun in your hands and the increasingly fragile faith that the Emperor is watching over you. Even if he cannot protect you here, even if this place is beyond his reach, even if you are, functionally and terrifyingly, on your own in a universe that has decided you should not exist. The enemy you cannot comprehend. The first demon you see up close is a horror that defies description, and yet you try to describe it anyway, because your mind needs to categorize, to understand, to file away information that might help you survive the next encounter. It is roughly humanoid in shape, but that's where any similarity to humanity ends. Its skin, if you can call it that, shifts between colors that hurt to look at directly. Pink and blue, and something in between that makes your eyes water. It has a face, or several faces, or maybe its entire body is a face, the features rearranging themselves moment to moment. Eyes that multiply and then disappear. A mouth that opens too wide, revealing not teeth but smaller mouths. And inside those mouths, still more mouths, recursive and impossible. It moves toward your position, and movement is the wrong word, because it doesn't walk so much as exist in one place, and then exist in another place without the transition between them. Space simply accommodates its will to be somewhere else. Your squad opens fire. A dozen laser guns unleash their fury, and you watch the beams strike home. The demon shrieks, a sound that is partly noise and partly telepathic assault, and it comes apart, dissolves into mist. You feel a moment of triumph, brief and foolish, because the mist doesn't dissipate. Instead, it gathers itself 20 yards to your left and reshapes into the demon once more, completely unharmed, and its laughter echoes in your skull. This is the fundamental problem with fighting demons. They are not alive in any way you understand. They are not biological organisms that can be killed by inflicting enough damage. They are creatures of pure warp energy, given form and purpose by the emotions and beliefs of mortal beings across the galaxy. When you kill one, you're not ending its existence. You're just disrupting its manifestation in the Imperium, forcing it back into the warp, where it will reform and return, perhaps in minutes, Perhaps in hours, perhaps instantly, if the barrier between dimensions is thin enough. The weapons you carry are designed for conventional warfare. Lass bolts can burn through orc hide and penetrate the armor of traitor Astartes. Autocannons can shred light vehicles. Heavy bolters can reduce cover to rubble. But against demons, these tools of destruction are only partially effective. A demon can be driven back, dispersed, temporarily banished. But unless the weapon is blessed, unless it carries the faith of the Emperor made manifest through sacred oils and litanies of hate, it cannot truly harm these creatures. You learn this lesson through repetition and loss. Your regiment initially tries to fight the demons using conventional tactics. Concentrated fire. Focus on eliminating threats one at a time. Establish fields of fire and create kill zones. But demons don't respect kill zones. They materialize inside your defensive positions. They ignore cover. They shrug off wounds that would drop a human or even an orc. You watch an entire squad unload into a greater demon, a thing that stands 15 feet tall with wings of brass and a sword that weeps fire, and it takes every hit and keeps coming, keeps advancing, keeps killing until the blessed power maul of a space marine chaplain finally banishes it in an explosion of warp energy. The lesser demons are almost worse because there are so many of them. Horrors that spawn more horrors when they die. Plague bearers that shuffle forward with inexorable patience, their diseased flesh absorbing punishment that would fell any mortal creature. Demonettes that move with impossible grace and speed, their claws opening throats before their victims even realize they're under attack. They come in waves, or all at once, or one at a time from every direction, and you stop trying to count them because the numbers are meaningless. How do you track an enemy that can be killed and return seconds later? How do you estimate enemy strength when their reinforcements come from a dimension where distance and number have no objective meaning? The ecclesiarchy priests become vitally important in these battles. Before Vordrith, they were support personnel, offering prayers and blessing weapons and boosting morale. Now they are combat assets, as critical as any heavy weapons team. A priest chanting the litanies of hate can make your lasgun effective against demon flesh. A blessed icon, carried into battle by a flagellant willing to die for his faith, creates a bubble of relative reality where demons find it harder to manifest. Holy water, sanctified oils, prayers inscribed on paper and affixed to your armor like makeshift wards, all of these become as important as ammunition and rations. You see the priests work miracles. Father Sebastian, a wizened man who looks too old to be in a combat zone, stands alone against a charging Daemon horde and raises his holy symbol. The light that emanates from it is not metaphorical or metaphysical. It is real light, painful to look at directly, and the demons recoil from it as if burned. Some dissolve on contact, others flee into the writhing landscape. The priest holds his position for 5 minutes, long enough for your unit to withdraw to a more defensible position, and when he finally falls, exhausted and dying from the effort, his last words are prayers, not for himself, but for the souls of the men he saved. But priests are few, and demons are many. The Imperium has deployed thousands of guardsmen to Vordrith. It has deployed perhaps 100 priests. The math is brutal and obvious. Most of your engagements will be fought without the benefit of faith made manifest. Most of your battles will be desperate scrambles against enemies that cannot be permanently killed, only driven back temporarily. And every second you buy is bought with blood and sacrifice. The traitor guard are almost a relief after fighting demons, because at least they die properly. These are men who were once like you, Imperial soldiers who took oaths to defend humanity, and then something broke in them or seduced them or offered them power they couldn't resist. Now they fight for the ruinous powers, and they bring all their training and knowledge of Imperial tactics to the enemy's side. They know how the guard fights. They know your weaknesses. They know that your armor is thinnest at the joints, that your heavy weapons teams are vulnerable during reload, that commissars are priority targets because killing them can cause unit cohesion to collapse, but they also die when shot. Their blood is red, their bodies fall and stay fallen. After hours of fighting enemies that mock death itself, there's something almost comforting about facing foes who can be permanently removed from the battlefield. You take grim satisfaction in putting last bolts through traitor chests, in watching them crumple and not get back up. It's a reminder that your weapons still work, that you're not completely useless, that this war is not entirely unwinnable. The cultists are worse than the traitor guard because they've given themselves over to chaos more completely. Many of them bear mutations that mark their allegiance. Extra limbs, eyes where there shouldn't be eyes, skin that has become scales or chitin or something unnameable. They fight with fanaticism that makes them terrifying opponents even when they're poorly armed. A cultist with nothing but a knife will charge through lass fire that kills 2 of his fellows and still reach your position, still sink that knife into your squadmate, still take someone with him even as he dies. And some of them have gifts that go beyond physical mutation. Sorcerers who can reach into the warp and pull out power that manifests as fire or lightning or worse things. Abstract concepts made briefly real. Reality warping that turns your cover into quicksand or makes the air around you freeze solid. Telepathic assaults that bypass armor and attack your mind directly, filling your thoughts with visions of your own death, of the futility of resistance, of the dark promises that await if you would just lower your weapon and embrace the truth of chaos. You witness the danger of these psychers firsthand when one of them targets your company. A woman, or something that was once a woman before the mutations took hold, stands on a ridge overlooking your position. She speaks words in a language that predates human civilization, and the ground between you and her begins to burn with warp fire. Green flames that spread impossibly fast, that cannot be extinguished with water or foam, or by smothering them with earth. Men caught in the fire don't just burn, they transform. You watch Private Hadrian's flesh run like wax, reforming into something with too many limbs and a head that splits open to reveal writhing tentacles where his brain should be. The commissar puts him down, but not before Hadrian has killed 2 more men with his new form. The sorcerer is laughing, and you can hear the sound across the battlefield despite the chaos of combat, despite the distance, as if her voice is being broadcast directly into your audio receptors. She's preparing another spell. You can see the energy gathering around her hands, reality warping as she draws power from the warp itself. And then a sniper's last bolt takes her in the head, and she drops like a puppet with cut strings, just like that. For all her power, for all the horror she commanded, she still had a brain that could be destroyed and a body that needed it to function. This becomes a core principle of fighting on Vordrith. The demons are hard to kill, but the mortals who serve them are not. The strategy shifts. You stop wasting ammunition on demon hordes and start prioritizing human targets. Kill the cultists. Kill the traitor guard. Kill the sorcerers before they can work their dark magic. Deny the demons their mortal allies, and they become somewhat less overwhelming, somewhat less coordinated, somewhat less effective at exploiting your weaknesses. But this strategy requires you to ignore the demons while you're engaging their human support. And ignoring a demon is a good way to die. They don't simply stand idle while you shoot at their allies. They attack with fury and malice, tearing through your lines, killing with claws and fire and weapons that exist partially in other dimensions. You learn to assign roles. Heavy weapons teams focus on demons, using blessed ammunition when available, and massed fire when it's not, trying to disrupt demon manifestations long enough for your infantry to eliminate human targets. It's not a perfect system. Men die in droves. Entire squads are wiped out in seconds. But it's better than the alternative, which is fighting both demons and their mortal servants simultaneously with equal attention and achieving nothing except your own extinction. The worst encounters are with the demon princes. These are beings that were once mortal, champions of chaos who achieved the greatest reward their dark gods could offer. Ascension. Transformation into something more than human, something that exists simultaneously as demon and as the memory of what they used to be. They are rare, thankfully, because each demon prince is a one-creature army capable of destroying entire platoons. You only see one, and that's enough. It comes during the push toward what the maps optimistically call Objective Delta, though the objective itself has shifted location 3 times since the maps were drawn. The Demon Prince arrives without warning, materializing in the middle of your advancing column. It towers over the battlefield, easily 20 feet tall, with wings that spread even wider. Its armor is fused to its flesh, or perhaps has become its flesh, black ceramite flowing like living oil. It carries a weapon that might have been a power sword once, but has been transformed into something greater and more terrible. A blade that cuts through reality as easily as it cuts through armor. The thing speaks, and its voice is thunder and whispers combined, layered and inhuman, but understandable. It knows your regiment's designation. It knows your commanding officer's name. It knows the names of the dead, reciting them like a litany, mocking the sacrifice they made, claiming their souls have already been fed to the dark gods and found wanting. And then it attacks. You do not see most of what happens next. The Daemon Prince moves too fast for human eyes to track. One moment it's standing still, the next it's in the middle of your formation, and men are dying, torn apart with casual ease. Lasfire converges on it from every direction, thousands of shots striking its form, and it shrugs them off as if they're rain. An autocannon opens up. Heavy shells designed to penetrate armor, and they explode against the Demon Prince's hide, staggering it, but not stopping it. A squad of Space Marines arrives, drawn by the Vox traffic reporting the Demon Prince's presence. They engage with the fury and precision that only the Emperor's Angels of Death can bring to bear. Bolters roar, each shot a small explosive charge. Power weapons crackle with energy. The Demon Prince actually takes damage now, its unnatural flesh burning where blessed bolt shells detonate, its movements slowing where power blades score hits. But it's winning. You can see it's winning. 2 Space Marines fall, their power armor breached, their genetically enhanced bodies not enough to withstand the Demon Prince's fury. Then, the Dreadnought arrives. A walking tomb, a hero from ages past, entombed in armored sarcophagus and given new purpose as an engine of war. It's massive, even larger than the Demon Prince, and its weapons are designed to kill things that conventional arms cannot touch. Assault cannon, heavy flamer, power fist crackling with enough energy to level a building. The Dreadnought and the Demon Prince clash in a battle that is more force of nature than combat. 2 impossible things trying to end each other's existence. You and your surviving squad mates use the distraction to fall back, as ordered. You don't see how the fight ends. You hear later that the Dreadnought won, but at the cost of catastrophic damage to its systems, and the ancient hero within returned to the eternal sleep from which he may never wake. The Demon Prince was banished, driven back into the warp, but you know it will return. They always return. That's the nature of fighting demons. There is no final victory, only temporary reprieve. The enemy on Vordrith is not like any enemy the Imperial Guard is designed to fight. Demons mock death. Traitors know your tactics. Cultists embrace madness as a weapon. Sorcerers bend reality to their will. Demon princes are demigods of destruction, and all of them exist in a context where the landscape itself is hostile, where reality is fluid, where the very ground you stand on might betray you at any moment. You cannot comprehend them. Not really. Your human brain was not made to process creatures that are ideas given form, beings that exist outside time and causality, entities whose existence is a contradiction of everything you thought you knew about the universe. So you stop trying to comprehend. You reduce them to targets, threats to be eliminated or avoided, problems to be solved with the only tools you have, your weapon, your training, and the increasingly desperate hope that the Emperor is watching over you, even in this hell. The slow corruption of self. It starts small. Small enough that you tell yourself it's nothing, that you're imagining things, that the stress of combat is making you see problems that aren't really there. Your left hand itches, not the normal itch of unwashed skin or healing wounds, but something deeper, something that feels like it's coming from inside your bones. You scratch at it when you think no one is watching, but scratching doesn't help. The itch persists, grows stronger, becomes a constant background sensation that threatens to consume your attention. After 3 days, you notice the skin on your hand has changed color slightly, just a shade darker than it should be. Could be dirt, could be bruising, could be any number of mundane explanations. But you know better. Deep in your gut, you know what's happening. The warp is getting into you. Corruption is taking root. The same forces that twisted this world are now twisting you, slowly, incrementally, working changes on your flesh that will mark you as tainted, as something that can no longer be trusted. You try to hide it. You wear your gloves even when the heat makes your hands sweat. You keep your sleeve pulled down during medical checks. You avoid the commissar's scrutiny because you know what happens to guardsmen who show signs of corruption. Bolt pistol to the head. Summary execution. No trial, no mercy. The Imperium cannot afford to let tainted soldiers remain in the ranks because corruption spreads, because one mutant can infect an entire squad with doubt and fear, because the appearance of Chaos's touch undermines the faith that holds the guard together. But hiding becomes harder as the changes progress. The discoloration spreads up your wrist. The skin there becomes tougher, developing a texture like leather or scales. You can feel it happening, a slow metamorphosis that you're powerless to prevent. You pray. Every night, when you can sleep, you recite the litanies of purity. You ask the Emperor to cleanse you, to burn out the taint, to restore you to righteousness. The prayers feel hollow. If the Emperor is listening, he gives no sign. The changes continue. You're not alone. That's the worst part. Everywhere you look, you see the signs of corruption taking hold in your fellow guardsmen. Corporal Voss develops eyes on his palms, tiny red eyes that blink independently of his main vision. He keeps his hands wrapped in bandages and claims it's from burns, but everyone knows. Private Jean's hair falls out over the course of a week, and what grows back is not hair, but fine metallic wire that makes faint singing sounds when the wind catches it. Sergeant Marek refuses to remove his helmet anymore, and when you accidentally catch a glimpse of his face through the visor, you see that his jaw has elongated, his teeth growing into fangs that no longer fit in his mouth properly. The commissars try to stay ahead of it. There are inspections now, more frequent than before. All guardsmen must submit to physical examination by the medici staff. Anyone showing signs of mutation is to be reported immediately. The penalty for concealing mutation is death. The penalty for being mutated is also death. It's a system designed to identify and eliminate corruption before it spreads, but it's also a system that breeds paranoia and fear. You watch men turn on each other. Accusations fly. Someone claims their squad mate's eyes glow in the dark. Someone else insists they heard demonic voices coming from a fellow soldier's mouth while he slept. Some of these accusations are true. Many are not. But the commissars can't afford to ignore any report, so they investigate everything, and innocent men die alongside the genuinely corrupted, because absolute certainty is impossible when dealing with the warp's influence. The mental corruption is harder to track than the physical changes, but you feel it happening nonetheless. Your thoughts become darker, angrier. You find yourself dwelling on grievances, on resentments you didn't know you had. The officer who gave you a reprimand 3 years ago for a minor uniform violation. The quartermaster who shortchanged your squad on rations last month. The commissar who executed your friend for showing cowardice when anyone with sense would have called it tactical withdrawal. These memories return with a vividness that feels unnatural, and they bring rage with them. A hot, burning fury that whispers how good it would feel to get revenge, to make them pay, to show them they can't treat you like this. You recognize these thoughts as foreign, as not truly yours. But recognizing them doesn't make them go away. They persist, getting louder, more insistent, until you find yourself entertaining them seriously, planning how you might do it, how you might kill the commissar, how you might sabotage your officer's next operation, how you might take what you're owed by force since it was denied to you through proper channels. The fantasies are detailed and vivid and deeply satisfying in ways that terrify you. Others in your unit are experiencing similar mental degradation. You can see it in their eyes during the rare moments of downtime. That distant look, that barely suppressed violence, the way conversations that should be routine become arguments, arguments become fights, fights become lethal confrontations that end with men dead and commissars forced to execute survivors to maintain discipline. The unit cohesion that makes the Imperial Guard effective is fraying. The bonds of brotherhood are being replaced with suspicion and hostility. Some men embrace the corruption. You see it happen. Private Torres, a man you've fought beside for 6 months, wakes one morning and announces he's received a revelation. The Emperor is a false god. The true power lies with the ruinous powers who offer strength and freedom and the chance to become more than human. He's developed scales on his arms, and he's proud of them, displaying them like medals. He tries to convince others to join him in accepting their transformation, to stop resisting and let the gifts of chaos remake them into something greater. The commissar shoots Torres in the face before he can finish his speech, but his words linger. You can see some of your squad mates thinking about what he said, weighing it, because the alternative to embracing corruption is fighting it, and fighting it is exhausting and ultimately futile because no one on Vordrith is remaining unchanged. Everyone is being corrupted to some degree. The only question is how fast and how far. You notice your dreams changing. Sleep, when it comes, is no longer restful. Instead, you find yourself in places that feel more real than reality. Vast, impossible spaces where the laws of geometry don't apply and things speak to you in voices that promise power, promise understanding, promise relief from the constant fear and pain. You wake from these dreams feeling violated, as if something has been inside your mind, rearranging your thoughts, planting seeds that will grow into terrible flowers. The dreams begin to repeat, the same locations, the same entities. They're trying to establish familiarity, you realize, trying to make the impossible seem normal, the horrifying seem acceptable. You're being groomed, seduced, broken down by degrees until the day comes when their offers sound reasonable instead of blasphemous. You try to fight it by forcing yourself to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually claims you, and the dreams are waiting. Your sense of self begins to erode. You catch yourself thinking thoughts in words you don't know, in a language that isn't Low Gothic or any dialect you've learned. You look in the mirror, when mirrors are available, and sometimes the face looking back isn't quite yours. Same features, but the expression is wrong. The eyes belong to someone or something else. You blink, and it's you again, but the moment of wrongness leaves you shaken, questioning which version is the real one. Faith, the foundation of every guardsman's resistance to corruption, becomes harder to maintain. The Emperor feels distant. His light, which should be a constant source of comfort and strength, seems dimmed by the oppressive presence of the warp. The prayers you've recited since childhood sound like empty words. The litanies ring hollow. You still go through the motions because not doing so would be noticed, would invite questions you can't answer without revealing your doubt. But the comfort they once provided is gone. Some men snap completely. You're on watch when it happens to Private Kellen. He's been quiet for the past day, withdrawn, not responding to orders with his usual efficiency. Then, without warning, he starts screaming. Not words, just noise, raw and animal and full of a terror so profound it makes your skin crawl. He tears at his own face with his fingernails, gouging deep furrows in his cheeks, trying to claw out his eyes. 4 men are needed to restrain him, and even then he keeps screaming, screaming until the commissar arrives and administers the Emperor's mercy with a bolt round that silences him forever. No one sleeps after that. Everyone is thinking the same thing. It could happen to me next. The corruption is not something you can fight with a gun or ward off with prayers. It's insidious, working on levels too deep for conscious resistance. It's patient, willing to spend weeks or months breaking you down. And it's inevitable, at least on Vordrith, where the warp is so present that breathing the air exposes you to its influence. You begin to wonder what the point is. You're going to be corrupted eventually. Everyone is. The only variables are the timeline and the degree. Maybe Torres was right. Maybe resistance is futile. Maybe you should accept the changes, embrace them. Try to retain some agency over what you're becoming, instead of fighting a battle you cannot win. The thought horrifies you, but you can't entirely dismiss it. That's how deeply the corruption has worked its way into your psyche. The changes to your hand have progressed. The skin is now unmistakably scaled, the texture rough and inhuman. The nails have thickened, become claw-like. You've started to feel strength in that hand that wasn't there before, as if the mutation is not purely negative, as if it's bringing enhancements along with the horror. You squeeze your lasgun with that hand, and the plasteel creaks under the pressure. You could crush a man's throat with that grip. The realization brings not just fear, but a flicker of something else. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction, or the early stages of the embrace you swore would never happen. Someone notices. Commissar Valen during an inspection. He sees your hand before you can hide it, and his eyes go cold. He draws his bolt pistol with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 100 times before. You know you're going to die. You know there's no appeal, no mercy, no second chance. Corruption is corruption, and the punishment is death. But then Colonel Harron intervenes. He's seen your service record, knows you've been reliable, effective, brave when bravery was needed. He argues that the mutation is minor, that you're still functional, that the regiment can't afford to keep executing soldiers for every minor change when the entire force is being corrupted to varying degrees. Valen is not convinced, but Harron outranks him, and after a tense moment, the bolt pistol is holstered. You're ordered to keep your hand covered, to report any progression of symptoms, and to submit to daily inspections. It's a temporary reprieve, not a pardon, but it's more than you expected. The incident changes something in you. You've been marked. Everyone knows now that you're tainted. Your squad mates look at you differently, some with pity, others with disgust, a few with envy, because your mutation is relatively mild and you're still allowed to fight while they've seen friends executed for less obvious changes. You're a walking reminder of what's happening to all of them. What they're desperately trying to pretend isn't happening. The corruption is not just changing your bodies and minds, it's changing what it means to be Imperial Guard. The pride you once took in service is being replaced with something else. Survival instinct, desperation, the knowledge that you are all becoming the very thing you were sent here to destroy. That transformation, that slow slide from righteous soldier of the Emperor to something less than human, is perhaps the cruelest aspect of fighting on a demon world. You are losing yourself by degrees. The person you were when you made planetfall is fading, being overwritten by something new and terrible. You can feel it happening, but you're powerless to stop it. Every day on Vordrith brings you closer to the moment when you will cease to be a guardsman and become merely another victim of chaos, another corrupted soul adding to the dark powers that feed on human suffering. The question is no longer if you will fall, but when, and whether you'll have enough humanity left to recognize what you've become. Command structure under chaos. The command tent is supposed to be a place of order, clean, organized, maps on tables, Vox equipment maintained, officers conducting themselves with the dignity befitting their rank. On Vordrith, it's a barely controlled chaos that mirrors the larger war. The maps are useless because the terrain shifts. The Vox is unreliable because transmissions sometimes arrive before they're sent, or repeat themselves in echoes that layer meaning upon meaning until simple orders become incomprehensible. And the officers are haggard, hollow-eyed men who look 20 years older than they did a month ago, trying to wage conventional warfare in an environment that renders convention meaningless. Major General Kravik commands the Astra Militarum forces committed to the Vordrith operation. He's a career soldier, 50 years of service across a dozen campaigns, decorated for valor and tactical brilliance. On a normal world, against normal enemies, he would be extraordinarily effective. Here, he's drowning. You can see it in the way he stares at the tactical displays, see it in the way his hands shake when he thinks no one is watching. The weight of command has become crushing because every decision he makes sends men to die, and those deaths buy almost nothing in terms of strategic advantage. The command structure is fracturing. Orders from higher up the chain are increasingly divorced from reality on the ground. Planetary command, operating from an orbital station that maintains safe distance from the surface, issues directives about objectives and timelines that assume normal operational tempo. They expect units to advance at standard rates, to hold positions for predetermined periods, to consolidate gains and prepare for next phases of the operation. But time doesn't work normally on Vordrith. A unit ordered to hold for 6 hours might experience 6 days or 6 minutes, and the strategic picture painted by Planetary Command is fiction by the time it reaches the troops doing the actual fighting. The regimental commanders try to adapt. Colonel Harron, your regiment's commanding officer, has stopped following orders that make no sense. He's learned to interpret directives loosely, to extract the intent rather than execute the literal command. When told to advance to Grid 7-4 and establish a perimeter, he understands this really means push generally toward what used to be Grid 7-4, before the geography changed, and set up defensive positions wherever that happens to be viable. This flexibility keeps his regiment functional when others are disintegrating under the strain of trying to follow impossible orders. But flexibility can only go so far. The breakdown in communication means units lose touch with each other, operate independently, without knowing what adjacent forces are doing, sometimes come into friendly fire situations because no one knows who's supposed to be where. You're nearly killed when another guard regiment mistakes your unit for traitors, opening fire before anyone can identify themselves properly. 3 men die before officers on both sides manage to establish Vox contact and stop the shooting. The commissars are working overtime trying to maintain discipline. Their role has always been to be the backbone of the guard, the iron core that prevents units from breaking when morale collapses. On Vordrith, that role has expanded to impossible proportions. Commissars are executing soldiers not just for cowardice or insubordination, but for showing signs of corruption, for questioning orders, for expressing doubt about the Emperor's protection, for any of 100 small infractions that in normal circumstances might warrant a reprimand, but here could be the first sign of something worse. Commissar Valen, attached to your regiment, is a zealot even by commissar standards. Tall, cadaverous, with eyes that burn with absolute conviction in the righteousness of the Imperium. He walks through the camp like a spectre of judgment, watching for any sign of weakness. You've seen him execute men for less than you'd think possible. A soldier who hesitated before advancing into fire. A squad leader who questioned whether an objective was achievable. A private who was overheard wondering aloud why the Emperor allowed Vordrith to fall in the first place if he truly protected the faithful. The executions are meant to inspire through fear, to make the living so terrified of commissarial judgment that they push past their limitations and fight with fanatic intensity. Sometimes it works. Sometimes men find reserves of courage they didn't know they had, throw themselves at the enemy with suicidal bravery because dying in combat is preferable to dying from a bolt round to the back of the head. But sometimes it backfires. Sometimes the executions breed resentment and rage. Sometimes soldiers start to see the commissars as greater threats than the actual enemy. Sometimes you hear whispered conversations about how things might be better if certain commissars met with unfortunate accidents. Valen is smart enough to recognize this dynamic. He varies his approach, mixing harsh punishment with moments of surprising humanity. You see him praying with a soldier who's showing early signs of psychological breakdown, offering comfort and absolution, reminding the man that the Emperor loves even the least of his servants. The soldier returns to duty with renewed spirit, at least temporarily. Valen's ability to read what each situation requires, whether it's violence or compassion, makes him effective but also deeply unsettling, because you can never predict which version of him you'll encounter. The company commanders are under enormous stress. These are the captains and majors who translate strategic objectives into tactical orders, who make minute-by-minute decisions about how to employ their forces. Captain Thorin, who leads your company, is a good officer, fair, competent, brave. He leads from the front, doesn't ask his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself, but you can see the strain wearing him down. He's lost 2/3 of his original company. Every face in the briefings is a new replacement, fresh troops who don't know the terrain or the enemy or how to survive on a demon world. He tries to pass on lessons learned, tries to keep them alive long enough to gain experience, but the casualty rate is overwhelming. The junior officers, the lieutenants and sergeants who directly command squads and platoons, bear the brunt of the actual fighting. These are the men who stand with you in the trenches, who share your rations and your fear. Many of them are promoted from the ranks, battlefield commissions given to soldiers who showed leadership potential or simply survived long enough to accumulate experience. Sergeant Marek was a corporal when the campaign began. Now he's effectively running the platoon because both lieutenants assigned to it are dead and the replacement hasn't arrived. Or maybe the replacement did arrive but got lost in transit and is wandering somewhere in the hellscape of Vordrith, trying to find a unit that no longer exists because the entire command structure keeps shifting. Orders frequently contradict each other. You receive a Vox transmission ordering your squad to hold position. 20 minutes later, a different Vox transmission orders you to advance immediately. Then a commissar arrives on foot with written orders to withdraw to rally point designated Epsilon, except no one can find Epsilon on any map. You do your best to interpret these conflicting directives, defaulting to the most recent order or the one from the highest ranking officer, but there's no way to be certain you're making the right choice. Initiative becomes crucial. Junior leaders have to make command decisions that would normally be far above their authority because waiting for clarification from higher up might mean waiting until everyone is dead. The command structure is also being corrupted from within, not just through physical mutation, but through spiritual contamination. You hear rumors, never confirmed but persistent, that some officers have made deals with the enemy, accepting gifts of chaos in exchange for information or deliberately botched operations. It's hard to know what to believe. On a demon world, paranoia is both survival mechanism and descent into madness. That officer who gave strange orders, was he compromised or just making the best of a bad situation? That commissar who seems to execute soldiers with particular enthusiasm, is he zealous or is he enjoying it in ways that suggest Slanesh's influence? The regimental standards, those sacred banners that represent the honor and history of each unit, become objects of near religious importance. The standard bearer is a position of immense responsibility. You must keep the banner flying, keep it visible, because it serves as a rally point and a symbol that the regiment still exists as a coherent force. When Guardsman Pell, who carried your regiment's standard, is killed by demon fire, there's nearly a riot among the surviving troops to claim the honor of bearing it forward. Sergeant Marek resolves the dispute by tearing the standard from Pell's dead hands and carrying it himself, daring anyone to challenge his right. Communication with Space Marine forces, when it's possible, reveals how differently the Adeptus Astartes approach this war. They fight with coordination that seems telepathic, moving as unified forces, even when spread across vast distances. Their command structure is streamlined. A sergeant leading a tactical squad has autonomy to make decisions that would require approval from multiple levels of guard command. They adapt instantly to changing conditions, and they do it without the fear that paralyzes guard units. When you fight alongside Space Marines, you're struck by how calm they are, how they treat fighting demons as just another mission rather than an existential horror. But the Space Marines are too few. For every one of them, there are 10,000 Guardsmen. The burden of this war falls overwhelmingly on the shoulders of regular humans, led by officers who are themselves just humans trying to make sense of the impossible. The command structure holds together through a combination of tradition, fear, faith, and stubborn refusal to admit that the situation is hopeless. Orders keep coming, men keep following them. The war grinds forward, or sideways or backward, direction being somewhat meaningless on a world where geography is fluid. There are moments of brilliant leadership. Colonel Harren orchestrates a fighting withdrawal that saves 3 companies from annihilation, personally directing fire from the command chimera while enemy forces close from all sides. Captain Thorin leads a charge that recaptures a fallen position, his power sword cutting through cultists while he roars litanies of hate. Sergeant Marek holds a line with just 8 men against Demon Horde that should have overwhelmed them, his absolute refusal to yield inspiring his troops to fight beyond their limits. But for every moment of brilliance, there are hours of confusion, mistakes, friendly fire, units getting lost, objectives abandoned because no one remembers why they were important, soldiers dying because orders arrived too late, or too early, or were misinterpreted by someone in the chain of command. The system is breaking down. Not catastrophically, not all at once, but gradually, inexorably, the way ice cracks under sustained pressure until the whole sheet shatters. You learn not to expect clarity or certainty from your superiors. They're doing the best they can, which on Vordrith means muddling through with incomplete information and making decisions based on gut instinct, because tactical doctrine breaks down when reality itself is negotiable. You learn to follow orders when they make sense, to interpret them creatively when they don't, and to use your own judgment when communication breaks down entirely. You learn that the command structure, for all its traditions and protocols, is just another casualty of fighting on a demon world, another system strained to the breaking point by forces it was never designed to resist. Daily survival on impossible terrain. The most basic functions of survival become monumental challenges on Vordrith. Finding water that won't kill you or transform you into something inhuman requires constant vigilance and repeated testing. The regiment's water purification equipment works, mostly, but it can't remove corruption that exists on a metaphysical level rather than a chemical one. You learn to look for streams that flow in normal directions, that reflect light properly, that don't whisper when you approach them. Even then, you test any water source before distributing it to the wider unit. One man drinks first, a volunteer, or more often someone assigned the duty, and if they don't show signs of mutation or madness after an hour, the water is declared safe enough for general consumption. Food is another nightmare. Standard rations remain safe as long as they're in sealed packaging brought from off-world, but those supplies are finite, and resupply drops are irregular at best. The terrain makes landing zones unpredictable. Drop pods that should land in designated areas end up scattered across kilometers of hostile territory or simply vanish into spatial anomalies. The regiment has had to supplement rations with whatever can be found on Vordrith itself, and that's where things get dangerous. The local flora looks edible, but usually isn't. Plants that resemble common vegetables turn out to be poisonous, or worse, infectious, with something that's not quite biological disease. Private Tess makes the mistake of eating berries from a bush that looks identical to food-bearing species from a dozen agri-worlds. Within hours, she's running a fever. By the next day, tendrils have begun growing from her skin, thin green shoots that resemble the bush she ate from. The medics can't stop the transformation. She's executed before the changes progress too far, but not before everyone learns the lesson. Nothing on this world is trustworthy. Fauna exists, but it's mutated beyond recognition. Creatures that might have been livestock or local wildlife before Vordrith fell have been twisted into predatory things that hunt with intelligence and malice. They're technically edible in that their meat provides calories and protein, but eating demon-touched flesh comes with risks. Some men develop mutations faster after consuming local game. Others seem unaffected. No one knows why or what determines who succumbs to the corruption more quickly. The regiment's command makes eating local fauna forbidden under penalty of execution, but starving men will take their chances when the alternative is dying anyway. Sleep is impossible in any meaningful sense. The environment is too hostile, too unpredictable. Someone has to be on watch at all times because attacks can come from any direction, including straight up or through dimensional spaces that shouldn't exist. The rotation is supposed to be fair, every man standing watch in proportion to the size of his unit, but exhaustion accumulates regardless. You learn to function on 2 or 3 hours of unconsciousness per day, and even those hours are filled with nightmares, vivid enough to leave you more tired upon waking than you were before you closed your eyes. The designated rest areas are as safe as anywhere can be on Vordrith, which means they're only moderately lethal rather than immediately so. Trenches dug into soil that tries to close on anyone sleeping in them. Bunkers constructed from local materials that sometimes develop eyes on their walls or begin bleeding for no apparent reason. The regiment's tech priests try to maintain equipment and vehicles in these rest areas, but machinery acts strangely. Machine spirits become agitated or malevolent. Vehicles refuse to start or start themselves without human input. Weapons jam at critical moments or fire without triggers being pulled. Hygiene becomes a luxury you can barely afford. There's no water to spare for washing. Uniforms rot on your body, the fabric deteriorating from exposure to air that's saturated with something that eats at materials not designed to exist in partially warp-touched environments. You stink. Everyone stinks. The smell of unwashed bodies, old blood, and fear becomes so omnipresent that you stop noticing it consciously, though it never fully fades from awareness. Infections are common. Small wounds that should heal instead fester, becoming gateways for corruption to enter your body more directly. Medical care exists, but it's primitive by necessity. The regiment's medici teams do what they can with limited supplies and even more limited understanding of how to treat conditions that have no analog in normal human physiology. How do you treat a wound that's infected with warp energy? How do you set bones that have begun to spontaneously reshape themselves? How do you address diseases that seem more spiritual than biological? The medics try. They use techniques that worked on other worlds. They improvise. They pray over their patients and hope that faith will accomplish what medicine cannot. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. The seriously wounded face grim choices. Evacuation off-world is theoretically possible, but practically rare. There are never enough evacuation flights, and those that do come prioritize the most valuable personnel: officers, specialists, anyone whose knowledge or experience makes them worth the resources required to extract them. A regular guardsman with a crippling injury is more likely to be given the Emperor's mercy than transported off-world for treatment. It's brutal calculus but necessary. The war needs soldiers who can fight, not wounded, who will consume resources and provide nothing in return. Shelter is temporary and always inadequate. The regiment moves frequently because holding any position for too long invites concentrated enemy attention. You dig trenches, knowing they'll be abandoned within days. You set up fortifications that will be left behind for the next unit, or, more likely, will simply be reclaimed by the hostile landscape. Nothing is permanent. Nothing feels secure. You learn to find rest in the moment, whatever moment you're given, because the future is uncertain, and the past is becoming harder to remember accurately. Equipment maintenance becomes a constant struggle. Your laser gun is your life, the one tool you have that can potentially keep you alive, and you maintain it obsessively. Cleaning it when time allows, checking the power pack connections, making sure the focusing crystals are aligned. But even with perfect maintenance, weapons start to malfunction. Not from mechanical failure, but from exposure to an environment where physical laws are suggestions. A laser gun that worked perfectly in the morning might refuse to fire in the afternoon, or might fire on its own when you're trying to move stealthily, giving away your position. The regiment's armored vehicles suffer worse. Chimeras and Lehman Russ tanks are complex machines with hundreds of potential failure points, and on Vordrith, all of those points are vulnerable to the corrupting influence of chaos. Tech priests perform rituals of maintenance, anointing machine spirits with sacred oils and reciting prayers in binary code, but the machines remain temperamental. A tank might function perfectly for weeks and then suddenly refuse to move, its engine dead for no reason that diagnostics can detect. Or it might transform, slowly and horribly, metal taking on organic properties, the vehicle becoming a half-living thing that screams when started. Temperature is another enemy. The climate on Vordrith doesn't follow normal patterns. You experience days when the heat is crushing, the air so thick and hot that breathing feels like drowning. Then, without warning, the temperature plummets, frost forming on everything, men dying of exposure while still wearing the same uniforms they sweated through hours before. The shifts are too rapid for the human body to adapt to. Hypothermia and heat stroke claim lives regularly, and there's little you can do except try to find shelter and hope the temperature stabilizes before too many casualties accumulate. The ground itself is treacherous. What looks like solid earth might be quicksand or worse. You learn to test every step in unfamiliar terrain, to watch where veterans place their feet and follow exactly in their footsteps. Even then, the ground can change. You watch a supply column moving single file along a path that's been used safely for 3 days, and suddenly the earth opens up beneath them, swallowing men and vehicles whole before closing again as if nothing happened. There's no warning, no way to predict where or when it will occur. You simply accept that any step might be your last. Navigation is nearly impossible. Compasses spin randomly or point in directions that can't be correct. The sun, when it's visible, moves across the sky in patterns that suggest the planet is rotating at different speeds or in different directions, depending on location. Stars provide no guidance because they rearrange themselves nightly. You navigate by landmarks, but landmarks shift. That distinctive rock formation you used as a reference point yesterday is gone today, or it's moved 3 kilometers east, or it's transformed into something that barely resembles what you remember. The only reliable method of movement is following in the paths of units that have gone before, and even that's not truly reliable. You follow what you hope are friendly forces and discover you've been tracking cultists who left the trail deliberately to lead you into an ambush. Or you follow markers left by your own regiment and end up walking in circles because the terrain has shifted, and those markers now point in directions that loop back on themselves. Casualty collection becomes a macabre necessity. The dead cannot be left where they fall because bodies on Vordrith don't stay dead in the conventional sense. The warp works on corpses, reanimating them or transforming them into something that hungers for living flesh. You learn to burn your dead when possible, to reduce them to ash that cannot be corrupted. When burning isn't possible, you at least try to destroy the head, based on the theory that demon puppets need some portion of the original nervous system to animate. It's grisly work, made worse by the fact that some of these corpses were friends, the Torhad. Psychological toll of basic survival is immense. You're constantly stressed, always alert, never able to fully rest. Your body is being poisoned by the air, the water, the food, when you can get it. Your mind is being assaulted by an environment that operates on dream logic rather than physics. You're surrounded by death and corruption, and the knowledge that you're changing, that everyone around you is changing, that the humanity you're trying to preserve is slipping away day by day. Yet somehow, you adapt. Humans are remarkably resilient creatures, capable of normalizing almost anything given enough exposure. Vordrith becomes your new normal. The impossible becomes routine. You stop questioning why the sky is that color, or why the river flows upward. You simply note these facts and adjust your behavior accordingly. You develop instincts for survival that have nothing to do with conventional military training and everything to do with existing in a place where conventional rules don't apply. You learn which areas have stable time, where an hour actually equals an hour, and you try to use those zones for rest and resupply. You learn which plants are merely poisonous versus which ones are actively corrupting. You learn to recognize the signs that precede a reality fluctuation, the way the air tastes metallic or how colors become more vivid right before physics decides to take a break. You learn to trust your gut more than your eyes because sometimes what you're seeing is a lie designed to lure you to your death. Survival on Vordrith is a full-time occupation that leaves little energy for anything else, including the actual war you're supposed to be fighting. But you survive anyway, through a combination of luck, skill, faith, and the stubborn human refusal to die quietly. Each day you wake up still human, still sane, still capable of holding a laser gun, is a victory. A small victory, perhaps meaningless in the larger context of a war that may be unwinnable, but a victory nonetheless. And in a place like Vordrith, you learn to celebrate the small victories because they might be all you're going to get. The psychological nightmare. The human mind was not designed to function on a demon world. Evolution shaped your brain to process threats that make physical sense. Predators with teeth and claws, enemies with weapons, dangers that obey causality and can be understood through observation and experience. Vordrith breaks all those rules, and your mind breaks along with them, slowly and incrementally, until you're not sure which thoughts are your own and which have been planted by the malevolent intelligence that permeates this world. Fear becomes your constant companion, not the sharp adrenaline rush of combat, which actually provides a kind of clarity, but something more insidious. A low-grade, persistent terror that gnaws at you during every moment of supposed safety. You're afraid when you sleep because the nightmares are indistinguishable from reality. You're afraid when you eat because the food might be corrupting you from the inside. You're afraid when you stand watch because you know something is out there in the darkness, and your laser gun might not be enough to stop it. You're afraid of your own thoughts because you're not entirely certain they're yours anymore. The fear manifests physically. Your hands shake at unexpected moments. Your heart races when there's no immediate threat. You develop a facial tic that you can't control, a twitch below your left eye that gets worse when you're tired. You sweat constantly, even in cold weather. Your stomach is in knots, acid churning, making it hard to keep food down on the rare occasions when food is available. The fear is literally eating you alive from the inside, dissolving your physical health as effectively as it's destroying your mental well-being. Panic attacks are common throughout the regiment. Men who have fought bravely for weeks suddenly freeze up, unable to move or respond to orders. They hyperventilate, clutching their chests, convinced they're dying. Sometimes they are dying, their hearts simply giving out under the sustained stress. Other times they recover after minutes or hours, but they're never quite the same afterward. The panic has revealed something to them, some truth about their situation that breaks the carefully maintained denial that allows most soldiers to function. The commissariat's response to psychological breakdown is predictably brutal. Any soldier who cannot perform their duty is a liability, and liabilities are eliminated. You witness this when Private Kale loses his nerve during an advance, dropping his weapon and curling into a ball while his squad pushes forward. Commissar Valen arrives within minutes, somehow always appearing at moments of crisis, and executes Kale with a bolt round to the head. The message is clear: control your fear or die. It's meant to be motivating. Sometimes it is. More often, it just adds terror of your own command to the existing terror of the enemy. The isolation is crushing. Even surrounded by other soldiers, you feel fundamentally alone because no one can truly understand what you're experiencing. The sensory inputs you're receiving are unique to you, filtered through your individual perception and the specific ways the warp is choosing to corrupt your consciousness. You try to talk about it with your squad mates, but the words come out wrong, inadequate to convey the full scope of the horror. The ground whispered my name sounds insane when spoken aloud, but you know what you heard. You know. Paranoia sets in as a survival mechanism that then becomes its own form of madness. You start to suspect everyone around you. That soldier who's been your friend for months, is he still himself, or has he been replaced by something wearing his face? The orders from your sergeant, are they legitimate, Or is he compromised and leading you into a trap? The medici who treated your wound, did he actually help you, or did he inject you with something that will transform you into a willing servant of chaos? Every interaction becomes fraught with suspicion, every relationship poisoned by doubt. The paranoia is self-fulfilling. When everyone suspects everyone else, cooperation breaks down. Trust evaporates. The bonds that make a military unit effective shatter. You start acting erratically, which makes others suspicious of you, which reinforces your paranoia, creating a downward spiral that's almost impossible to escape. The commissars try to counter this by making examples of anyone who spreads rumors or accusations, but that just drives the paranoia underground, where it festers and grows stronger. Hallucinations are routine. You see things that aren't there, or maybe they are there but existing in frequencies of reality that shouldn't be visible to human eyes. Shadow figures at the edge of your vision, faces in the clouds that speak prophecies in dead languages, your dead squadmates standing watch beside you, offering advice in voices you remember too well. Sometimes you can distinguish hallucinations from reality. Other times you can't. You report enemy contacts that don't exist or fail to report ones that do because your brain can no longer accurately process sensory information. The dreams are the worst part. Sleep should be escape from the waking nightmare of Vordrith, but instead, it's an intensification of it. The things that visit you in dreams are more real than reality, massive presences that speak without words directly into your consciousness. They show you visions, futures that might happen, or pasts that might have happened, or presents that exist somewhere in the infinite possibilities of the warp. You see yourself transformed into something monstrous and powerful. You see your homeworld burning. You see the Emperor revealed as a corpse god whose faith is built on lies. You see truths that you can't speak aloud without being executed for heresy. Some of the dreams are seductive. They offer you things you want. Power to protect your friends. Knowledge to understand what's happening. Pleasure to ease the constant pain. Freedom from the rigid hierarchy of the Imperial Guard. The dreams show you what you could become if you would just stop resisting. Just accept the gifts that chaos wants to give you. They're so vivid, so compelling, that you wake up actually considering the offers before you remember that they're lies, temptations designed to corrupt you. Or maybe they're not lies. Maybe they're genuine offers. How would you know the difference? The regiment's ecclesiarchy priests try to provide spiritual support, but they're overwhelmed. There aren't enough of them to minister to thousands of soldiers experiencing psychological trauma simultaneously. Father Yorath conducts group confession sessions where men line up to speak their fears and receive absolution. It helps, briefly, but the relief never lasts. The psychological wounds are too deep, and the source of those wounds is constant. You can't heal damage that's being inflicted continuously. Some men turn to self-medication. Alcohol, when it's available, which is rarely. Combat drugs issued by the medici for pain management, hoarded and used for their numbing effects. Hallucinogens distilled from local plants that at least provide hallucinations you chose rather than ones imposed by the environment. The commissariat tries to crack down on drug use, but they're fighting a losing battle. Men who are facing death daily will seek any escape they can find, and if oblivion comes from chemical sources, so be it. Dissociation becomes a coping strategy. You learn to separate yourself from your experiences, to observe your own actions, as if you're watching someone else. The body that pulls the trigger is not your body. The voice that screams orders is not your voice. You exist somewhere behind your eyes, a passenger in a meat vehicle that stumbles through horrors while you watch from a distance. It's not healthy, but it keeps you functional. The alternative is to be fully present for every moment of trauma, and that way lies immediate psychological collapse. Memory becomes unreliable. You're not sure if things you remember actually happened, or if they're false memories implanted by warp exposure. Did you have a sister back home, or did you make her up? Was there really a battle last week where your squad held against impossible odds? Or was that a dream, or a vision, or wishful thinking? The ground of objective reality has become so unstable that your own history is in question, and without a reliable past, how can you plan for any future? The rage comes and goes. Sometimes you're seized by fury so intense that you want to kill everything around you, friend and foe alike. You want to empty your laser gun into the nearest target and then beat someone to death with your bare hands, and then keep killing until you're killed in turn, because at least dying in a fury of violence would be an ending to this sustained nightmare. The rage is probably Horn's influence, the blood god reaching through the warp to stoke emotions that serve his purposes. You recognize this intellectually, but recognition doesn't diminish the feeling. The rage is real, regardless of its source. Despair is the alternative to rage. Sometimes you're so crushed by hopelessness that you can barely move. What's the point? The war is unwinnable. Vordrith can't be reclaimed for the Imperium. It's too thoroughly corrupted. Everyone here is going to die or be transformed into something worse than dead. The Emperor is not coming to save you. The Space Marines can't win this alone. The Guard is being ground up and accomplishing nothing of strategic value. These thoughts are Nurgle's whispers, the Plague God's message that entropy is inevitable and resistance is futile. You know this, but knowing doesn't make the despair less crushing. Some men simply shut down. Their minds refuse to process any more trauma and retreat into catatonia. They sit unresponsive, eyes open but seeing nothing, beyond the reach of orders or threats or any external stimulus. They're useless as soldiers, but the commissars don't execute them immediately because there's a faint hope they might recover. Some do, after days or weeks. Most don't. They simply exist in their fugue state until malnutrition or exposure or enemy action ends them. The few sanctioned psychers attached to the regiment suffer worst of all. Their heightened warp sensitivity, which makes them valuable assets in normal combat, becomes a crushing liability on a demon world. They experience the full psychic assault of chaos, with no filters, no protection beyond their training and willpower. You watch one of them, a young woman named Astrid, simply catch fire one day. Psychic fire that burns from the inside out, immolating her in seconds while she screams about the truth of the universe. Her death serves as a warning. If people whose entire purpose is to interact with the warp can't survive here, what chance do regular humans have? The Imperium's official doctrine on post-traumatic stress is that it doesn't exist, or if it does, it's a sign of weak faith. Soldiers are expected to endure any horror in service to the Emperor and emerge unchanged. The reality is more complicated. Men break. Everyone breaks eventually. The only question is how long you can hold together before the accumulated weight of trauma exceeds your capacity to bear it. There are no therapeutic resources available, no counselors trained in treating severe psychological trauma, no safe spaces to process emotions or work through fears. The closest thing you have to mental health care is the prayers of priests who themselves are barely holding on to their own sanity. You cope through gallows humor and camaraderie and the shared understanding that everyone is suffering equally. Misery loves company, and you have plenty of company in your misery. The psychological nightmare of fighting on Vordrith is in many ways worse than the physical danger. You can face an enemy with a laser gun. You can't shoot your way out of madness. The damage being done to your mind is invisible but permanent. Even if you survive this war, even if you make it off-world somehow, you will never be the same. The things you've seen, the experiences you've endured, the ways you've been forced to compromise your humanity in order to survive, these scars will never heal. You are being broken at a level more fundamental than flesh, and there is no recovery from that kind of destruction. Combat tactics and strategies. Fighting demons requires you to throw away most of what you learned in training and develop new tactics through brutal trial and error. Standard Imperial Guard doctrine emphasizes massed firepower, combined arms warfare, and overwhelming the enemy through superior numbers and coordination. On Vordrith, these principles still apply, but with significant modifications to account for enemies that don't die properly and terrain that actively works against you. The first lesson is that killing demons is not the primary objective. You can't kill them, not permanently, not unless you have weapons specifically blessed for that purpose, and those are rare. What you can do is disrupt them, force them to disperse and reform elsewhere, buy time for your unit to reposition, or complete an objective. Every demon you temporarily banish is a few seconds or minutes where it's not actively killing your squad mates. That's the victory condition, not elimination, but delay. Concentrated fire works, to an extent. If you can get enough laser guns focusing on a single daemon, the accumulated energy will overwhelm its manifestation and force it to discorporate. It takes a lot of shots. A full squad unloading at maximum rate can banish a lesser demon in maybe 5 seconds of sustained fire. A greater demon requires concentrated fire from multiple squads plus heavy weapons support. The math is simple but brutal. You need more guns than the enemy has demons, and you need them firing constantly, because the moment you let up, the demons press their advantage. Heavy weapons are essential. Autocannons, heavy bolters, las cannons, anything that can deliver massed firepower or high-energy impacts. A well-placed las cannon shot can disrupt a greater demon's manifestation long enough for your infantry to withdraw. Autocannons are excellent for dealing with lesser demon swarms, their rapid-fire shells chewing through multiple targets. Heavy bolters provide sustained suppression, forcing demons to either abandon their advance or push through a storm of explosive mass-reactive shells that will tear even warp-spawned flesh apart. The problem is ammunition. Heavy weapons consume prodigious amounts of ammunition, and resupply on Vordrith is unreliable. You learn to ration your heavy weapons fire, using them sparingly, preferring to rely on massed lasgun fire when possible, because lasgun power packs can be recharged, whereas autocannon shells and bolter rounds are finite. When you do employ heavy weapons, you make each burst count, aiming for maximum effect rather than suppressive fire. Blessed ammunition is worth more than standard ordnance. A single blessed bolt round can permanently banish a lesser demon. A blessed lascannon shot can seriously wound even a greater demon, forcing it back into the warp for extended periods. The problem is that blessed ammunition is incredibly rare. The ecclesiarchy can only consecrate so many rounds, and the demand vastly exceeds supply. You might get one blessed magazine per squad per week if you're lucky. Using it becomes a command decision. Do you expend your blessed rounds on this threat, or save them for an even worse situation that might never come? Melee combat against demons is suicide unless you have blessed close combat weapons, which infantry squads don't. Bayonet charges. Bayonet. That might work against cultists or traitor guard are death sentences against demons. The creatures simply tear through massed infantry like they're not there. You learn to avoid close combat at all costs, to fall back before daemons can close the distance, to use mobility to maintain standoff engagement ranges. When melee becomes unavoidable because you're cornered or overrun, you fight anyway, because dying with a weapon in your hand is slightly better than dying while running, but you know it's futile. The only exception is when Space Marines are present. The Adeptus Astartes have close combat weapons blessed by their chapter's chaplains, power weapons that can actually harm demons, and the physical prowess to use them effectively. You see a squad of Space Marines charge into demon hordes that would annihilate guard infantry, and they carve through the enemy with chainswords and power fists, each Astartes worth 50 regular soldiers. In those moments, you understand viscerally why the Space Marines are called the Emperor's Angels of Death. Defensive positions require constant reinforcement. A trench you dig today will be compromised by tomorrow, either through enemy action or simply because the ground decides to betray you. You learn to build redundant positions, multiple fallback lines, overlapping fields of fire. When one position becomes untenable, you withdraw to the next, maintaining a fighting retreat that bleeds the enemy while preserving your force. It's not glorious warfare, but it keeps you alive longer than trying to hold static positions would. Artillery becomes less effective than on normal worlds. The terrain shifts, making pre-plotted fire missions useless. Communications issues mean calling for fire support is difficult, and response times are unpredictable. Enemy forces don't mass in ways that make them good artillery targets. They appear and disappear through warp rifts, making concentrated bombardments pointless. The basilisks and other artillery pieces still fire, but more often they're used for direct fire support rather than indirect bombardment, turning them into mobile bunkers that provide heavy firepower at close range. Armored vehicles have mixed utility. On one hand, a Lehman Russ battle tank provides firepower and protection that infantry can't match. On the other hand, the terrain often prevents armor from maneuvering effectively, and Daemon weapons can tear through even thick armor plating. You see tanks immobilized by ground that turns to quicksand, or destroyed by Daemon fire that melts through armor like it's paper. The key is to use armor as mobile fire support, rather than trying to conduct armored assaults. Keep the tanks moving, keep them shooting, and extract them before they become bogged down in impossible terrain. Chimera transports are invaluable for tactical mobility. Being able to move squads quickly across dangerous terrain while protecting them from small arms fire is crucial when the battlefield can change configuration without warning. You use chimeras to respond to threats, to reinforce weak points, to extract units that are about to be overrun. The transport capacity means you can concentrate force where it's needed most, and the armored protection means you might actually arrive at your destination alive. Combined arms warfare, the hallmark of effective guard doctrine, is difficult to coordinate on Vordrith, but not impossible. When you can get infantry, armor, and artillery working together, the results are impressive. Infantry spots, targets, and holds ground. Armor provides mobile firepower and breakthrough capability. Artillery delivers massed bombardment to disrupt enemy formations. The coordination required is challenging, given communication problems and the fluid nature of combat. But competent officers can still orchestrate combined arms operations that achieve meaningful tactical victories. The importance of reconnaissance cannot be overstated. You need to know what's ahead before you advance into it. Scouting parties, often comprised of the most experienced and expendable troops, move forward to identify threats and terrain hazards. Many of them don't return, but the information they provide saves countless other lives. You learn which approaches are viable, which areas are death traps, where the enemy is concentrated. That knowledge is tactical gold in an environment where moving blind is a guarantee of disaster. Night operations are particularly hazardous. Darkness on Vordrith is not normal darkness. It's alive with things that hunger for human flesh. Your night vision equipment helps, but it also shows you things you'd rather not see. Movement in shadows that suggests presences too terrible to confront directly. The standing order is to avoid movement at night when possible, to dig in and defend until daylight, however irregular that might be. When night operations are necessary, they're conducted with maximum force and the expectation of significant casualties. The flip side is that daytime offers little advantage. The sun provides light, but not comfort. You can see farther, but what you see is often worse than not knowing. The Daemon forces don't seem particularly hindered by daylight, suggesting that their vision operates on different principles than human sight. You fight during the day because you can coordinate better, not because the enemy is weakened. Flanking maneuvers require careful planning. The fluid terrain means you can't rely on maps, but you can use terrain features as reference points. That mountain of screaming faces to your left isn't moving as far as you can tell, so you can use it to orient your unit's advance. The forest that bleeds when you cut the trees will serve as a boundary marker. You conduct flanking attacks not to surprise the enemy, since demons probably don't experience surprise the way humans do, but to divide their attention and create tactical opportunities. The importance of morale cannot be overstated. A squad that's holding together psychologically will fight effectively even in desperate circumstances. A squad that's starting to break will collapse at the first sign of serious opposition. You, as a soldier, have minimal ability to affect morale directly, but you can model the behavior you want to see. Stand firm when others waver. Follow orders when confusion reigns. Keep your weapon in hand when others drop theirs. Your example might keep your squad mates from breaking, and their presence might do the same for you. Retreat is not cowardice on Vordrith, it's tactical necessity. Knowing when to fall back is as important as knowing when to advance. You learn to read the flow of battle, to recognize when your position is becoming untenable, to understand that dying in place accomplishes nothing if your death doesn't buy anything of value. The commissars are less trigger-happy about retreat here than they might be on other worlds, because even they can see that some positions simply cannot be held. The ultimate strategy is attrition. The Imperial Guard has been called the Hammer of the Emperor, a blunt instrument that achieves victory through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. On Vordrith, that doctrine still applies. You cannot outfight daemons on an individual basis, but you can exhaust them through persistence. Every daemon you temporarily banish is one that's not immediately threatening your position. Every cultist you kill is one fewer enemy coordinate demon attacks. Every fortification you build, however temporary, is one more obstacle the enemy must overcome. You grind forward inch by inch, day by day, accepting horrendous casualties as the cost of doing business. It's brutal, it's wasteful, it's arguably immoral, but it's the only way the Guard knows how to fight, and surprisingly, it works. Slowly, painfully, the Imperial forces are pushing back the chaos presence on Vordrith. The price being paid is catastrophic, but there's progress. The line is moving in the right direction, even if that direction is measured in yards per week, rather than miles per day. The few who survive. Survival on Vordrith is not a matter of skill or courage or faith, though all three help. It's largely luck, being in the right place when the artillery barrage hits the wrong grid coordinates, being assigned to a patrol that encounters cultists instead of demons, having a mutation that's minor enough to escape immediate execution. You survive through 10,000 small accidents of fortune, while thousands of others die through equally random misfortune. And survival comes with its own costs that become apparent only after you've paid them. The official casualty rate for the Vordrith campaign is not released to the troops. Command doesn't want you knowing that your regiment has been ground down to 15% of its original strength. They don't want you calculating that your odds of seeing next month are substantially worse than your odds of dying tomorrow. But you know anyway. You count the faces in your unit. Note how few are familiar. Realize that most of the people you deployed with are gone. Dead, transformed, driven mad, or simply missing. The survivors are a minority, and a shrinking one. Extraction becomes possible after the campaign reaches certain milestones. When Space Marine strike forces achieve their primary objectives and begin withdrawing, they take Guard units with them when transport capacity allows. When Navy vessels achieve orbital superiority and can safely deploy transports, some ground forces are evacuated. But these extractions prioritize command staff, specialists, and anyone else deemed valuable. Regular infantry like you are lowest priority. You're expected to hold until relieved or until there's no one left to hold. The few Guardsmen who do get extracted face an uncertain future. The Inquisition takes an immediate interest in anyone who has spent time on a demon world. You're thoroughly screened for corruption, subjected to interrogations that last for days or weeks. Tech priests scan you for physical mutations. Psychers probe your mind for spiritual taint. Inquisitorial acolytes ask you the same questions repeatedly, looking for inconsistencies that might suggest chaos influence. It's invasive, humiliating, and absolutely necessary from the Imperium's perspective, because one corrupted soldier returned to normal Imperial space could spread their taint to others. Many survivors don't pass the screening. Physical mutations are grounds for immediate execution. Mental instability that suggests ongoing chaos influence earns the same result. Even something as simple as expressing doubt about the Emperor's protection or questioning why the Imperium allowed Vordrith to fall can be interpreted as heretical thinking worth a bolt round. The Inquisition operates on the principle that it's better to kill 100 innocent men than let one corrupted soul slip through. And that means the survival rate among extracted guardsmen is not good, even after they've escaped the demon world. Those who do pass screening face quarantine. You're held in isolation for months, while inquisitorial agents observe you for any delayed manifestations of corruption. Some mutations take time to appear. Some forms of mental taint lay dormant until triggered by specific stimuli. You exist in a cell or a quarantine facility, given minimal human contact, subjected to constant surveillance. It's safer than being on Vordrith, but not by as much as you might hope. The psychological toll of isolation after months of combat is significant. Some men break in quarantine, even though they held together on the battlefield. The memories don't fade. That's perhaps the cruelest aspect of survival. You might hope that time and distance would dull the horror, that the human brain's tendency to suppress trauma would provide some relief. Instead, the memories remain vivid. You close your eyes and you're back on Vordrith. You smell the air that smelled wrong. You see the landscape that defied geometry. You hear the screams of men being torn apart by things that should not exist. The memories are intrusive, overwhelming, triggered by random stimuli. A particular color, a specific sound. Anything that resonates with your experiences on the demon world brings it all flooding back. Sleep becomes its own nightmare. The dreams that plagued you on Vordrith don't stop just because you've left the demon world. If anything, they intensify, as if whatever intelligence was reaching into your mind while you slept has maintained its connection despite physical distance. You wake up convinced you're still there, that the escape was a dream, and the reality is endless war against impossible enemies. It takes minutes or hours to convince yourself that you're actually safe, that you're off-world, that you survived. And then you have to sleep again, and the cycle repeats. The physical mutations you developed don't reverse. The scaled hand remains scaled. The extra eye that opened in your shoulder blade doesn't close. The changes to your bone structure, the alterations to your internal organs, the 1,000 small corruptions that marked your time on Vordrith are permanent. You're not fully human anymore, not by the Imperium standards. You're abhuman at best, mutant at worst. The fact that you're allowed to live is a privilege that can be revoked at any moment if you demonstrate that your continued existence threatens Imperial interests. Reintegration into normal Imperial society is impossible. You can't return to your homeworld. The Inquisition forbids it because you might spread corruption. Your family, if they're even still alive, is told you died in service to the Emperor. It's easier that way. Easier than explaining that you survived but changed, that you're not the person they remember, that looking at you would reveal uncomfortable truths about what service to the Imperium costs. Some survivors are assigned to new guard units. If you've proven resilient enough to survive Vordrith and stable enough to pass inquisitorial screening, you have skills and experience that make you valuable. You know how to fight in hellish conditions. You've seen things that would break most soldiers and you're still functional. That makes you useful for other nightmare deployments, other campaigns against chaos where regular troops would be lost immediately. You become a specialist in fighting battles that should not be fought, going to places that should not exist, waging war against enemies that defy comprehension. Others are deemed too damaged to return to active service, but too valuable to simply execute. You might be assigned to training cadres, teaching new recruits about the realities of fighting chaos. Your lectures are sanitized versions of your experiences, cleaned up to avoid breaking the trainees before they even deploy, but still conveying essential survival information. Or you might be attached to inquisitorial retinues as an auxiliary, someone who can provide ground-level perspective on chaos operations and who's already been thoroughly vetted. These positions offer relative safety, but they also mean you never fully leave the war behind. You remain immersed in the fight against chaos, just in different capacities. The psychological damage manifests in countless ways. You startle at shadows. You can't be in enclosed spaces without feeling trapped. You avoid crowds because too many bodies too close together reminds you of being surrounded by cultists. You flinch at sudden noises. You have panic attacks triggered by colors or smells or sounds that resemble things you experienced on Vordrith. You're hypervigilant, always scanning for threats, unable to relax even in secured locations. The constant state of alertness is exhausting, but you can't turn it off. Your brain has been rewired for survival in an environment of constant danger, and it can't adapt back to normalcy. Relationships are difficult. How do you connect with people who haven't been through what you've been through? How do you explain to someone the full weight of fighting on a demon world without either understating the horror or traumatizing them with graphic details? You find yourself isolating, withdrawing from human contact, because it's easier than trying to bridge the gap between your experiences and normal life. Other survivors understand, but there aren't many of them. And even when you find each other, the shared trauma is not always enough to overcome the damage. Some survivors turn to faith with renewed intensity. Having seen the reality of chaos, the undeniable existence of demonic forces makes the Emperor's divinity feel more real. If demons exist, then gods exist. And if the ruinous powers are real, then the God Emperor must also be real. You become more devout than you ever were before deployment, attending services, reciting prayers, seeking meaning in faith that trauma has paradoxically strengthened. The experience breaks some people's faith, but it reinforces yours, giving you something to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. Other survivors lose faith entirely. If the Emperor is all-powerful and all-knowing, why did he allow Vordrith to fall? Why did he permit his servants to suffer so completely? The inability to answer these questions erodes belief until you're left with nihilism or worse, the suspicion that maybe the Chaos Forces have a point. Maybe the Imperium is built on lies. These thoughts are dangerous and heretical, but they're also understandable reactions to trauma. The ecclesiarchy tries to provide pastoral care to wavering survivors, but sometimes the damage is too deep and faith cannot be restored. The physical health problems persist. The exposure to warp energies has left you with a constitution that's compromised in ways both understood and mysterious. You get sick more easily than you should. Wounds heal slowly or not at all. You develop conditions that medical personnel can't fully diagnose. Ailments that seem to have biological components but also spiritual ones. Your body is breaking down under the accumulated stress and corruption, aging faster than it should, approaching failure that might come in years or might come tomorrow. There's no way to predict it. You simply accept that your lifespan has been shortened and try to make what time you have left count for something. A few survivors are simply too broken to ever function normally again. They exist in medici facilities or ecclesiarchy hospices, cared for by staff trained to deal with severe psychological trauma. They're not conscious enough to suffer, existing in sedated states or dissociative fugues that protect them from memories too terrible to process. It's a mercy of sorts. They survived physically, but their minds didn't make it back from Vordrith. They're living casualties, breathing and technically alive, but not really present in any meaningful sense. You wonder sometimes if death would have been preferable. To have died on Vordrith alongside your squadmates, to have your name added to the regimental rolls of honor, to be remembered as a hero who gave everything for the Emperor. Instead, you survived, and survival means carrying the weight of experiences that will never leave you, that define you more completely than any other aspect of your identity. You're a survivor of Vordrith, and that's simultaneously a mark of distinction and a curse you can never escape. The galaxy is full of wars. The Imperium is always fighting somewhere, against someone, in defense of worlds that number in the millions. Most of those wars are conventional, fought against enemies that die when shot, and on worlds where physics works properly. But there are also places like Vordrith, demon worlds, and chaos strongholds, and nightmare battlefields, where reality breaks down, and survival is not just a physical challenge but a spiritual and psychological one. The few guardsmen who survive those deployments become repositories of dark knowledge, living proof of horrors that most Imperial citizens will never comprehend. You're valuable for what you know, and damned by what you've experienced. There's no recognition, no parades, no honors for survivors of demon worlds. Just silence, isolation, and the burden of memories that will never fade. Conclusion. Fighting on a demon world represents the absolute extreme of what the Imperial Guard can be asked to endure. It takes the already horrific realities of warfare in the 41st millennium and amplifies them beyond what most human minds can process. The soldiers who deploy to places like Vordrith are not exceptional humans. They're regular guardsmen drawn from standard recruiting worlds, given standard training, equipped with standard gear. What makes them extraordinary is not their initial capabilities, but their capacity to endure conditions that should break them and somehow continue fighting anyway. The war on Vordrith is not won through brilliant tactics or superior technology. It's won through attrition and sacrifice, and the willingness of thousands of guardsmen to die in service of objectives they barely understand. The campaign drags on for months or years, time being fluid enough that no one can say with certainty how long the fighting has lasted. Eventually, the Space Marine forces achieve their strategic objectives. The major demon strongholds are destroyed or neutralized. The warp rifts that allowed Chaos forces to reinforce are sealed, or at least reduced. The planet remains corrupted, perhaps forever, but the threat it posed to neighboring systems is eliminated. The final evacuation, when it comes, is chaotic. Transport ships descend to extract survivors, while enemy forces press attacks, trying to inflict maximum casualties even in defeat. You board a transport with other remnants of your regiment, cramming into cargo holds designed for equipment rather than personnel. The ship lifts off under fire, its hull shuddering as enemy weapons strike its armor. You don't feel relief until the vessel makes it to orbit, until Vordrith becomes just another corrupted sphere receding in the viewports, until the Geller fields activate and the ship prepares for warp transit that will carry you away from this nightmare. The official casualty figures, when they're finally released, are staggering. 73% of deployed guard forces killed or missing. Another 15% deemed too corrupted for return to service and executed by inquisitorial order. Of the remaining 12%, half are classified as permanently disabled and assigned to non-combat roles. That leaves maybe 6% who are both alive and fit for continued military service. Your regiment deployed with 30,000 soldiers. Fewer than 2,000 leave Vordrith intact enough to fight again. The Imperium considers this an acceptable cost. The strategic objectives were achieved. The demon threat was eliminated. The Guard performed as intended, serving as the hammer that crushes enemies through weight of numbers rather than finesse. In the vast calculus of galactic warfare, where billions serve and millions die daily, the casualties on Vordrith are just numbers in a ledger. Regrettable but necessary. Expected even.